Okay, so Sucette is made from the very old vineyard, Grenache vineyard, and you said it planted 1867.
We just got, so the records are very hard to dig up, and we just got word that it's 1880, not 1867. There is a confusion in the record.
1880?
1880, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Still 140 years
Still
ago.
Old, but
A bit shorter. Okay, never heard. Okay, so please tell me about RZA Block. How the vineyard looks like. How did you meet that special block?
Amazing. Okay, will we go through the photos right now, or we'll just talk about it first?
Up to you. I can do that.
Okay.
So please tell me whenever.
Okay. So
would she prefer photos or no photos? Is the question.
Oh, we have a choice. I think we should do the photos. It's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
ではちょっとそのRZAブロックの画面を見たいと思います。Yes.
If you want to start, then.
So, they're all out of order. Folder I sent you, they're in a specific order. Yeah. There we go.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So this is just to give context about where we're working in Australia. We are far down in the green area. We're a little bit north of, I'm sorry, not the green area, I'm pointing at Melbourne, in the kind of pinkish area, up from Adelaide. So you fly into Adelaide and you drive north east about an hour, 45 minutes. Yeah, and then you get to the Barossa Valley. The Barossa Valley tends to be, if we can go to the next slide, just to give a little bit of history. This is a photo in the Vine Vale, which is a very small subset of the Barossa Valley. This is in the Vine Vale where the sand is. But this is just a photo to give you kind of an idea of how long people have been there growing grapes. This area was settled in terms of grape growing, at least, around 1860, 1850. The German settlers came in and they started planting grapes then. It used to be an area for, in terms of the Vine Vale where the sand is specifically, for planting carrots because it was easy to pull them up out of the sand when they were ripe. But then they figured out that grapes could easily grow there and do quite well. Let's go to the next. So in terms of where we are, this kind of gives you a soil idea of what's happening across the entire Barossa Valley. The Vine Vale is where we are. That's the lightest colored sand without any other sand mixed in, without any other clay, without any other type of soil mixed in. It's the one area where the main soil is sand specifically. Let's go again. This is a photo from our vineyard in the RZA Block, in the Vine Vale specifically. We have about 1 meter or so, give or take, of sand before you hit this red clay. The majority of the rest of the Barossa Valley is this kind of sticky, moist red clay. It's called bisky clay. And because of that, you have wines that tend to have a little bit darker fruit character, tend to be a little bit higher in alcohol. They tend to be the stereotypical idea of a Barossa red. In the Vine Vale, which is where the sand is, where we're working, the character of the wines is quite different and it's based on the sand. There you have much more red fruited wines rather than these black fruited wines of the rest of the valley. From here, this is a photo of our vineyard, the RZA Block. In the distance, you can see these kind of gentle rolling hills. That's the Barossa Ranges. Behind the Barossa Ranges is the Eden Valley. The reason that the Vine Vale area exists here, the sand exists here and not in the rest of the Barossa, is because of the breakdown of the granite and quartzite of the Eden Valley down through the Barossa Ranges, and then it deposits itself via these alluvial fans. You can kind of see these little gullies. Over time, wind, water, this is eroded and deposited this kind of alluvial puddle of sand, and that's why the vine veil exists there. Another thing that these gullies bring to our area, the vine veil specifically, and the rest of the valley does not have it, are these cool nighttime breezes. So you have colder air up high in the Eden Valley, and at night it's heavier than hot air, so it slips down and it whips through the vine veil. People there casually call it the vine veil nurse as kind of a joke. This wind that whips through, and it keeps that area cooler than the rest of the Barossa Valley, and it also helps keep that area more disease-free because of the wind.
Can I say something here?
Yeah,
one cool thing about this photograph is the wind that Carla is describing. You can see all of the vines are pushed to the left-hand side of your screen. So this is a rare view after pruning, before bud break. And at one point over the last 140 years, the vineyard was probably abandoned and was not cared for on a regular basis. And that plus this wind, you can see the vines have literally grown to the left because of the wind, that's pretty amazing to think about, that over 140 years, the wind has actually changed the direction of the vines. Kind of great. Let's go to the next, yes.
So this is an aerial shot of the vineyard. I showed this to you just to show you what we've done in the block since we purchased it. Inside the black outline on the upper left, those were olive trees. There were tons of fruit trees, these kind of like green smudgy areas. From the center of the block where you can see kind of this red clay, that's clay that was dug up while people were farming, and it was spread on top of the sand in order to keep the sand in place. Otherwise, the wind that comes through pushes the sand around, and so whoever farmed it before us put some of the clay on top of the sand in order to keep the sand in place. But from that kind of clay area up towards where the road is, all of that was fruit trees, all of it was, there are some sheds there and olive trees. And if you go to the next photo, you can see the work that we've done. We've taken out the olive trees, the fruit trees, and we've replanted all 100% Grenache, and all ungrafted on its own roots bush vines.
From our own cuttings.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty neat.
So this is a really cool video to give you this idea of how fine the sand is. It really is like beach sand. And again, this is decomposed quartzite and granite. Super, super fine, very, very light. And you can see how the wind would easily push that around. Let's go to the next.
It's amazing.
So when we first bought the place, it was filled with a bunch of prickly pear cactus and a bunch of these fruit trees and bamboo. And then over time, and we can flip through the next few photos a little bit quickly, I just wanted to give you an idea of this vineyard itself was kind of forgotten. Grapes were being sold, but nothing was being labeled under this vineyard's name. We are the ones who named it the RZA Block. Grapes were being sold to many, many different winemakers. But a lot, almost like you saw in the previous photo, almost half of the vineyard itself, the block itself, was fruit trees and nothing at all. When we decided to move everything out of the way so that we could replant Grenache, if you go to the next photo, first of all, it's a great soil shot of those two types of sand above the red clay. And then also, this kind of gives you an example. These were old, they were ungrafted, but they were still, they'd been trellised up. We cut all of those down so that those also are bush vines now.
And so the pit, as we're talking about the pit.
So the pit itself, we knocked all of the prickly pear cactus into a very large pit, because this is the way that you kill it. You have to suffocate it. And then we poured a ton of dirt back over it in order to have it just die and then decompose.
And for context, that's a 3-meter deep pit. It's really deep. So you see the gray and then the white soils, and it's below all of that you finally get to the clay.
Yeah, the clay is that reddish color there. So these are the olive trees that there were 160 olive trees. All of this area was forgotten. For a long time, Grenache was one of the great grapes in the Barossa Valley, and then it kind of fell out of favor with a lot of people. And at that time, we think the people who owned our vineyards stopped paying attention to it, neglected it, did not farm it. And so, as you'll see in the next few photos, the one single wire that it was trellised up on, that fell over eventually, but we'll get there in a minute. Here, we knocked out all of the olive trees, and we created an enormous, fantastic bonfire.
We had a Burning Man in the Barossa Valley.
Yeah. So this is the field where all of the olive trees were. Yeah, this is the cover crop, and then we had a huge, huge bonfire. And what it is now, as you'll see in the next photos, is completely replanted with baby bush vines, baby bush Grenache. Yeah.
When did you plant this block?
A year ago, just about a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So we bought it in 2017 and knocked out the trees, knocked out the prickly pear, and then planted a cover crop and let it sit. And then we had a fire and we let it sit. But during that time with our first pruning, we took the cuttings and put them in the nursery, and then they grow their own roots. So again, ungrafted. And so over that time, you develop your own rootlets, and then we planted the new vines.
So this is just a snapshot of the old vines in the old section of the vineyard. Again, you can see the sand and what was left of cover crop for that year. And this is, I just wanted to give you kind of a larger picture of how it's planted. It's just all of these big bush vines. You'll see in the next few photos, there was originally, it was planted up on this single wire. So these posts are maybe, how tall are they? They're like 2 feet tall, maybe. Ish.
18 inches.
Yeah. And so we know based on when the valley itself was trellised like this, that's one of the things that kind of helped us zone in on how old the vineyard is before we were able to find the official records. But everything was trellised up on this one single wire. And what we can see, or what we are guessing, what happened with the vineyard. If you go to the next few photos, what happens is, this is all of the wire that we pulled out of the vineyard. There's a ton of wire. So we've pulled out all of the wire, and there's nothing but the bush vines left. So you have some of these old decomposing posts, but those are just there because we didn't take them out. There's no trellising whatsoever left in the vineyard. You'll see in some of these older photos here, here's a great example. You can see how the vine itself was trellised up, and then over neglect and over time, it just broke the trellis and fell back down to the ground. So you can see over in the left part of the photo here, that's part of the wire before we pulled it out of the vineyard. So when we bought it, you saw all of these very, very old vines that almost start to look like these bonsai trees. They just take their own kind of, they move kind of like waves. You'll see in the next photo, some of them can go down beneath the sand and come back up. So it's not very easy to farm or prune.
It is a bonsai.
Yeah, because some of these have gone back down and then replanted themselves and then popped up a different vine. So you don't know where the roots are exactly. So it's hard to come through and knife the vineyard. It's very labor intensive to farm, but you have these incredible old vines that haven't been touched. Yeah, let's go to the next photo. Yeah, just another idea. You can see it's insane to walk through. They kind of move like this and they just sprawl. Yeah, there's no rhyme or reason. There are so many old bush vineyards that we've seen that are beautiful, that are very, very well manicured, that have been made into these beautiful, beautiful gardens, really. And our vineyard is much more on the wild side. It doesn't look like it's been carefully manicured. It looks like it was left to do its own thing. Winemaking.
So yeah, this is literally where the wine's made. We basically rent space and aided expertise at RZA, which is in Vinevale. So this is about 1 kilometer away from our vineyard. And just to give you a little bit more sense of how, I guess, obscure our vineyard was for a long time. I've been working here for 20 years and had no idea this vineyard exists. the family that owns Rusden have been there for 6 generations, and they had no idea that this vineyard existed. And all those prickly pear and olive trees, it all hid it from the road, so nobody knew it was there. So it's this secret garden back in the behind the trees. It's pretty cool. So once we pick, we go to Rusden, and you can see this is the winemaking. It happens outside. It's under the sun and the moon and the stars and the wind and the bees, the spiders, the rain. It's very natural. And so each of these fermenters, they're 2-ton fermenters. And so what we do when we make the wine is we put whatever percentage of whole cluster that goes in first. And then the next thing that happens is we just stem the remaining part over the top. And we'll let it sit for a day and then do a gentle pigeage. So just foot tread. So you begin to break it up just a little bit and get some juice, because they're not big fermenters. So they don't really, not so much crushes under its own weight. So you get it a little bit of a boost. And then after that, we do gentle pump overs. And so you give it a pump over in the morning and a pump over at night. And what that does is, of course, it keeps the cap wet, but also gives it some air, right? So the fermentation needs some air. You don't want to have any like reductive or stinky aromas, if you will. And so it's a gentle pump over twice a day for plus or minus 8 days. And then we go into a basket press and then into the oak that we talked about when we tasted the wine. So it's generally been old French oak, used previously for white wine. And now we've recently started introducing, alongside that oak, we add a little bit of new Stockinger barrels. And again, those are untoasted, so it's not a flavor, it's a tannic component.
Let's go to the next photo and you'll see some of just visual. I mean, this is obviously us having the time of our lives, foot treading.
You gotta have fun.
But this gives you this is another fermenter that we use if we have a big harvest and we have more than can fit into the stainless steel fermenters. This is just an example of one of the clusters. So this is an example of me digging out the fermenter, because after the fermentation is right near the end and you're about to press the liquid off of the solids, you can drain all of the liquids off, and then you still have to empty out the fermenters. So
you have to get in there and dig.
You have to get in there and dig, yeah.
It's a good way to earn your lunch.
But these are the old basket presses. So this is what we'll use. It's a slow 12-hour press cycle in order to get the last juice out of the solids. It's a slow 12-hour press cycle. I mentioned that in order to say that it's gentle. We don't want to extract any hard tannins. We don't want anything else kind of rough from the wine. We want it to remain very, very delicate. The 12-hour press cycle happens overnight, and the idea is that with about 1 or 2% potential alcohol still in wine to be fermented out, because there's still a slow fermentation happening when we're pressing the solids, there's this kind of cloak of protective gas over the wine, and that keeps it from oxidizing while during the slow press cycle. In these next two photos, this is, for example, I believe the 2017 vintage was a much more like light pink wine almost, and this is the 2020. This is 2020, yeah. And so 2020 was down. Oh my God, what were we down?
We were down 80%.
Yeah.
So our block gave us just 4.92 tons. So not even 300 cases of 2020 vintage. So very, very little, but very, very healthy. And that was due to, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. You go.
This due to two things. So as we chatted about with the 2018, when we tasted the wine, that was the beginning of this kind of warming, drying trend. 2019, warmer and drier, and we were down 50%. In 2020, warmer and drier still, and we were down 80%. Part of that was the heat, and part of that was the warmth and the lack of rain, but part of it was also wind at flowering. So the wind, which is generally very helpful, keeps the grapes clean, keeps them largely disease-free, helps us preserve acidity by a huge diurnal shift day to night. It also came too early and really was very disruptive at flowering for the 2020 vintage. So regretfully, we have very, very little of it, but that's okay. It is what it is. And as we speak today on August 31st, it's winter in Australia, of course, and the drought appears to be long over. So it's been raining lots, which is really exciting. Cover crops growing really, really well, and we're pleased.
But one of the cool things, or I guess it's not, I mean, it's cool because it will give us a much different type of wine, but like a huge vintage variation. But it's exciting for us because the fruit is absolutely beautiful. For both 19 and 20, the juice itself was a darker color, as you can see between these two photos. And that's because the clusters themselves were smaller. And so the grapes were smaller. So the ratio of skin to juice was quite different than it is in a normal year. And so you have a darker colored wine. You will have more tannin in the wine. Again, we're not talking like Barolo or Cabernet Sauvignon tannin. We're talking about just a little bit more structure than Grenache in a warm climate tends to have. But also what you have is this incredibly like dynamic, explosive aromatic quality from this very low yield old vine vintage. And that's it. The next is just us. That's not us. That's just us.
That's it.
Yeah, we could tell you a little bit about, I think we should speak a little bit about why we're in the Vine Vale in the first place, and then how we came to find the vineyard. I think that'd be very helpful. I'll take why we're there, and you take how we're there.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. So why we're in the Vine Vale is you have some of the oldest living vineyards on the planet, which we think is very, very interesting. Specifically in South Australia, knock on wood, there's never been phylloxera. If you add the sand to it, phylloxera generally doesn't thrive or even survive in sand. So again, this is another reason why the vines are so old. But specifically for us, when we think about the grapes we love, it's a list of grapes that all share certain attributes. So Sangiovese, Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, Grenache, they all have this very pretty lifted kind of seductive thing, which we like very, very much. With varying degrees of tannin and slightly different fruit qualities, but I think that if you like one, you tend to like those four grapes. But Grenache itself can tend to be a bit of a chameleon, or it responds very specifically to its terroir. And of course, we can see that throughout Spain, through the south of France, California, and even just within the Barossa Valley, we can see great differences. So there's some fabulous old vineyards out in the Seppeltsfield area of the Barossa Valley, and this is, it's a few kilometers and a short drive from us, but there it's all what's called the heavy red biscuit clay. And you saw that clay a little bit earlier in the presentation. And what that clay does, it attracts a lot of heat, and then at night it reflects a lot of heat. You're also farther away from the Barossa Ranges, so you don't get the cooling breezes at night, so it stays warm. And consequently, the Grenache becomes very, very dark in color and very, very heavy in character. And then it doesn't, to me and to Carla, it doesn't tend to resemble that Pinot Noir Sangiovese thing that we love, right? When you're closer to the mountain and you're on the sand, you don't get much color, and that's okay, right? You don't smell color and you don't taste color, so who cares about color anyways? But what you do get are all these really lifted, pretty aromatics. And again, the things that do make you feel like it's the warm climate analogy of Pinot Noir. That's the idea. We want that seductive quality. So that's why we make the long trip. It's like, where do you find great Grenache growing in sand? Well, not very many places. There's a couple fancy addresses in the south of France where you find it. Not so much in Spain to our palates. Maybe they're starting to find some spots in California. But for us, the reason why we travel so far to Australia is specifically for the Grenache grown in sand that's very, very old. The way we actually found this particular vineyard is a fun story.
Richard had mentioned previously his old project. It was called Betts and Shoal. And that ended it was 2000, what were these?
First vintage was 2001, and we sold the project. The final vintage was in 2009.
So at that time, he was buying grapes from a friend of his. And a few years ago, we started buying for our project. We started buying grapes from that same friend. It turns out this friend isn't so friendly. And he said, sure, I'll sell you grapes this year. And what happened is he told many people that he was going to sell them grapes, and he oversold his vineyard. So he didn't have enough grapes to fulfill his orders. And so we were working our own harvest, and a stranger came to the winery where we work and said, "Where's Richard and Carla? I need to talk to them." And we were both like, "Who are you? And why are you angry?" And it turns out that this gentleman, his name was Robert, this gentleman owned the vineyard, or worked the vineyard next to the guy who we were buying grapes from. And he said, Noel, who we had been buying grapes from, oversold his vineyard. And so he bought grapes from my vineyard and sold them to you and said it was from his vineyard. So it was a little tricky business. But we had just tasted that morning the previous vintage of these grapes from the vineyard that's now ours. And we said, the fruit is amazing. And he said, well, I have more this year because I thought that I would need to sell you these secret grapes again. And he said, do you want to come see the grapes? Do you want to come see what's left in the vineyard to see if you want to buy anything? We said, no, we don't need any more this year, but we'll come see it anyways. We wanted to be respectful. And so we went to see the vineyard, and we drove over there. And again, it's about 1 kilometer north of where the winery is, where we work. And we stepped out of the truck into this deep, deep, deep sand, like you saw in the video, just this like fluffy white sand, looked around at the vineyard, and Richard turned to the man and said, can we buy the vineyard? And the man said, it's not mine. You know, I just work it, I farm it, but I can talk to the guy who owns it. And 2 days later, we were standing in the very old shed on the vineyard, signing on a handwritten receipt that we were buying this vineyard. We were able to talk to the old man who owned it, and he said, yes, I'll sell it to you. So it was this very quick process. But the lead up to that was that from the early 2000s, when Richard had previously been making wine down there, he'd been looking for a vineyard for a very long time. And we'd been looking for a vineyard on our project for about 4 years. And so we saw the vineyard and we said, this is it. This is the best Grenache vineyard we've ever seen. And so we quickly snapped it up and then started work on it.
So it was 2017.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. It was pretty romantic. The old guy that owned it, Sammy Casciarelli, was an Italian immigrant to Australia after the Second World War, and he worked, like many Italians did, in the Holden car factory. But they brought with them all of their traditions and way of life. So they wanted to have a vineyard, and they wanted to have fruit trees, and they wanted to have animals and make sausage and grow olives. And so this was their little Garden of Eden almost, you know. And when we met Sammy, I speak Italian, and we still couldn't understand each other. He is a very Southern Italian, and mine's more of a Northern Italian, but that didn't matter. We connected just over the love of Grenache and Vine Vale and this place. And we just had tears in our eyes telling him how excited we were about being able to find our own home in this part of the world. It was wonderful. And so when we went to actually just sign, it was literally like a piece of paper. We wrote it out on this old piece of paper. It's this big. We have it somewhere. And he's pouring us his wine, which is, it's brown, you know. He would make his wine and leave it in glass jugs in this shed all summer, all winter, you know, but whatever.
40-degree temperatures.
Yeah, yeah.
It was disgusting.
So these big plastic red cups of brown wine, and I said to Carla, just drink
it. Just drink.
But his sister had made goat sausages, and so we're eating goat sausages and drinking this brown Grenache and just, you know, cheers.
It was so emotional. We were so grateful to have the opportunity to work with a vineyard like this. And the fact that it came to us in this strange way by somebody lying to us about how they had sold us, and then we found the vineyard this way, it just felt like it had been handed to us, you know, by a higher power. And we were like, we'll take it. We will take it. We love it. So, yeah.
It was one of the magical days of life.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the great explanation.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
At last, maybe could you make the short greeting to the Japanese wine lovers?
Yes. The what greeting? I'm sorry?
Just a short one.
A short greeting?
Yeah, short greeting to the Japanese wine lovers.
Absolutely.
What kind of greeting other than our names do you want? What kind of information?
Whatever you want to say to the Japanese people.
Thank you so very much for being curious about our wine and for supporting it. We can't wait to come meet you. We cannot wait to come and visit your country. We're very, very excited about sharing what we do with everybody and anybody, and we're really, really grateful to have you be part of the family.
Yeah, I would add to that it's such an enormous and amazing gift to love something and do what you love and work hard at it, and then see that someone else loves it too. So thank you. That's an enormous. It's what life is about, I think. So I also can't wait to come. It'll be really, really lovely. And thank you for sharing our wine. I can't wait to share them together. Thank you.
And thank you, Shin-san. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Please enjoy beautiful lunch.
Thank you.
Have a
I'm
good
going to
evening.
take dinner.
Yeah.
Let us
Thank
know
you
if
very
you
much.
need us. You're so
Yeah.
welcome.
It's a real pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to see you guys in Japan next time.
We're so
Yes.
excited. We're so excited.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Ciao, ciao.
All right.
Ciao,
Ciao,
ciao.
ciao.